Welcome to the Good Book Tales, where ancient words come alive in the world we live in today. Let me ask you something. Have you ever read a verse from the Bible, nodded your head, and then quietly thought, wait, what does that actually mean? If you've ever felt that way, especially when reading the letter to the Ephesians, then you're exactly where you need to be right now. Because today, we're going to open one of the most powerful letters ever written, the Book of Ephesians. But not in the way it's usually explained in church or theology class. This isn't just a Bible study, it's a story. A story about identity, purpose, and what it really means to live as a follower of Christ in a world that constantly pulls us away from who we're meant to be. Picture this. It's around the year 60 AD. The Apostle Paul is sitting in a Roman prison cell, his hands chained, his future uncertain. He's not surrounded by comfort or freedom. Yet somehow, from that cold, dark place, he writes one of the most hopeful, powerful letters in the entire New Testament. A letter that still shakes hearts, challenges minds, and reveals mysteries about God's plan for humanity. Ephesians isn't just a letter, it's a map. A map that shows us how to move from confusion to clarity, from emptiness to purpose, from division to unity. Paul writes to remind ordinary people, like you and me, that we are chosen, loved, and called for something far bigger than we can see. But here's where it gets even deeper. When you really start reading Ephesians, something strange happens. The words don't just speak to you, they start speaking about you. Every verse seems to pull back a layer of who you think you are, revealing who you're meant to be in Christ. It's not just theology, it's transformation. So in this video, we're not just going to explain Ephesians verse by verse. We're going to step into it. We'll explore the hidden meanings behind Paul's words, uncover the real-life stories of the people he wrote to, and see how this ancient letter still has the power to reshape your heart today. But before we dive in, there's one question we need to answer. The question that changed everything for the Ephesians and could change everything for you too. If God has already chosen you, already blessed you, and already given you everything in Christ, then why do so many of us still feel lost? That's where our story begins. The city of Ephesus was unlike any other place in the ancient world. It was loud, crowded, and alive, a center of trade, ideas, and worship. Merchants shouted in the marketplace, ships came and went from the harbor, and the smell of spices, smoke, and salt filled the air. But beneath all that noise, something deeper was happening. Ephesus wasn't just a city of wealth and wonder. It was a city of spiritual confusion. People worshipped many gods, the most famous being Artemis, whose massive temple was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Everywhere you looked, idols and altars stood tall, offering false promises of power and protection. And yet, right there in the middle of it all, a small group of believers gathered quietly in homes. They didn't have a church building or fancy robes. They didn't have social status or protection. What they had was something invisible but real, faith in Jesus Christ. They believed in a new kind of kingdom, one not built by human hands, but by grace. Still, living in Ephesus wasn't easy for them. Every day they walked past temples where crowds prayed to stone gods, and every night they heard voices telling them to blend in, to stay silent, to not stand out. This is the world Paul was writing to. He knew these people personally. He had lived among them, seen their struggles, and taught them about the mystery of God's love. But now he was far away, imprisoned for preaching that very message. Imagine Paul, sitting on a rough stone floor, hearing the chains clink as he moves his hands, and yet, his heart burns with hope. He writes not to complain, but to remind them, and us, that no matter where we are, God's plan is still unfolding. Paul's words weren't random teachings. Every line in the book of Ephesians feels intentional, almost like he's painting a picture. He wants the believers to see what's really going on beyond what their eyes can see. A battle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces that whisper lies and fear. And maybe that's why this letter still feels alive today. Because even though centuries have passed, we still face those same whispers. We still question who we are, where we belong, and if God really sees us in the chaos. Somewhere in those words, hidden between the greetings and blessings, lies a message that could change how you see your own life. But before we uncover it, we have to step further into Paul's world to understand what he meant when he said we are chosen, sealed, and called for a purpose. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's where things start to get personal. For the believers in Ephesus, the real struggle wasn't just outside in the streets. It was inside their hearts. Every day they wrestled with two worlds, the world of Rome, full of idols, pride, and power, and the world Paul spoke about, a kingdom built on faith, humility, and love. It sounded beautiful, but it wasn't easy to live out. Some of them worked in places that sold idols. Others had families who didn't believe in Jesus and thought their new faith was foolish. The pressure to fit in, to stay quiet, was real. They wanted to follow Christ, but the cost of doing so kept getting higher. Paul's letter came to them like a light in the darkness. He reminded them that they weren't just surviving. They were part of something eternal. But even then, questions haunted them. If God had chosen them, why were things still so hard? Why did it feel like their prayers bounced off the ceiling? Paul's words about spiritual warfare weren't just metaphors to them. They were reminders that unseen forces were at work, forces that tried to make them forget who they were in Christ. In the middle of that tension, rumors began to spread. Some said Paul might never be released from prison. Others wondered if the message he preached was too dangerous, too different from what people wanted to hear. A few believers even started doubting their own faith, afraid that following Jesus might lead to the same chains that held Paul. The group began to fracture quietly, their unity fading under fear. Yet, in the quiet moments, when they gathered to read Paul's letter by candlelight, something stirred. The words felt alive, almost as if Paul was right there with them, urging them to stand firm. But what he said next would shake everything they thought they understood about themselves and about God's plan. One night, as the believers gathered in a small house on the edge of the city, the tension in the room was heavy. The air smelled of oil lamps and damp stone, and outside, the sound of soldiers' boots echoed faintly through the narrow streets. Everyone sat close together, their faces lit by the trembling light of a single flame. Someone unrolled the parchment, Paul's letter, and began to read the next lines aloud. The words were simple but powerful. Put on the full armor of God. For a moment, silence filled the room. It wasn't just poetry. It felt like a warning, like Paul knew exactly what they were facing. Each word seemed to strike deep. Stand firm. Take up the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation. These weren't just ideas. They were survival. Outside their walls, people mocked their faith. Inside, fear whispered that maybe they should just stop, go back to the way things were. But as they listened, something began to shift. It wasn't comfort they felt. It was courage. Trembling, but real. Still, there was danger all around them. The city was changing. The authorities were watching. Anyone seen spreading Paul's message could be accused of rebellion. A young believer named Damaris looked around the room, her eyes wide. She had lost her job for refusing to sell idols. Another man, Onesimus, still carried the scars from being beaten for speaking about Jesus in the marketplace. Now, they were being asked to stand stronger than ever. How could they, when everything seemed to be falling apart? The reader's voice shook as he finished the passage. Paul's words echoed through the silence. After you have done everything, to stand. The candle flickered. Outside, the sound of footsteps drew closer. And in that tense, fragile moment, everyone realized the battle Paul spoke of wasn't coming. It was already here. The footsteps outside grew louder until they stopped right outside the door. Every heart in the room seemed to freeze. The believers exchanged fearful glances, unsure if it was a neighbor, a spy, or something far worse. The candlelight trembled as a soft knock echoed through the silence. No one moved. Then came another knock, this time louder, sharper. Damaris's hands shook as she clutched the parchment, whispering a prayer under her breath. Finally, Onesimus stepped forward and opened the door just a crack. Standing there was a man wrapped in a travel cloak, his face hidden in the shadows. For a moment, no one recognized him. Then, as he stepped into the light, gasps filled the room. It was Tychicus, Paul's trusted messenger. He carried another letter from Paul, worn and creased from travel. But what shocked everyone wasn't just the letter. It was the look on Tychicus's face. He was exhausted, his eyes filled with something between urgency and sorrow. He told them Paul's situation had worsened. The Roman guards had tightened their watch, and the possibility of Paul's release was fading. Yet even from that prison cell, Paul's message was unchanged. Don't give up. He wanted them to know that the same power that raised Christ from the dead was alive in them, even now. The words brought both comfort and confusion. How could Paul speak of power when he was in chains? How could freedom exist in suffering? The believers sat in silence, each one wrestling with the question. Then Tychicus revealed something even more unsettling. Paul had written about a mystery, a secret long hidden but now revealed. It wasn't just about them as individuals. It was about a divine plan that stretched across time itself, uniting heaven and earth under Christ. The revelation stunned them. Could it be that their small gathering, in this noisy city full of idols, was part of something cosmic? That their faith, fragile and small, was shaking unseen kingdoms? The thought was almost too much to grasp. But before they could process it, another sound shattered the quiet, a distant shout, followed by the thud of boots. The guards were searching nearby homes. Panic rippled through the room. Tychicus looked at them, his voice low but steady. Paul said we would face this. But he also said, when you've done everything, stand. The flame of the candle wavered again, casting long shadows across the walls. No one spoke. The truth was clear now. The message of Ephesians wasn't just words on parchment. It was a lifeline, and holding on to it might cost them everything. The sound of boots grew louder until it felt like the walls themselves were trembling. The believers had no time to hide. The parchment was rolled tight, tucked quickly into a clay jar, and placed beneath a loose stone on the floor. The candle was blown out, plunging the room into darkness. For a few heartbeats, there was nothing but the sound of breathing and fear. Then the door burst open, and light from torches flooded in. Soldiers stepped forward, shouting, demanding to know what was happening. Tychicus stepped out first, his hands raised, his voice calm. He said they were only reading letters, nothing more. The guard snatched one of the scrolls, scanning it quickly, his brow furrowed. Letters about a crucified man, he muttered, confused. What threat could this be? For a moment, it seemed like they might leave. But one soldier spotted the hidden jar, and with a sharp motion, cracked it open. The parchment of Ephesians slipped out, and the captain picked it up. He began to read, his lips moving silently. Then something strange happened. His face changed, just slightly, but enough for everyone to notice. He paused at Paul's words. Asterisk, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Asterisk, the room was silent, waiting for his reaction. Finally, he looked up, eyes dark but uncertain. If these words are true, he said quietly, then you follow a God who asks for peace, not rebellion. And just like that, he handed the parchment back and ordered his men to leave. When the door shut behind them, no one spoke for a long time. Then Damaris began to cry, not from fear, but from relief. It felt like something invisible had just shifted, like the words of Paul had protected them even in their weakest moment. Tychicus smiled faintly. Paul said the real battle isn't against men, he whispered. Now you've seen what he meant. But as the group began to calm, another voice spoke from the corner, a man who had been quiet the entire time. He stepped into the light, revealing a Roman insignia hidden beneath his cloak. You're not safe yet, he said softly. There are others coming, men who don't care what your letters say. The room froze again. The relief turned to dread. The battle wasn't over after all. It had only just begun. The man's warning sent a chill through the room. For a few seconds, no one knew what to say. Then Tychicus looked him in the eye and asked quietly, if you came to warn us, why risk revealing yourself? The man hesitated, his voice low. Because I heard those words, he said, glancing at the parchment still clutched in Damaris's hands. And something inside me changed. I've done things I can't undo, but when I heard that we could be forgiven, I couldn't turn away. The believers exchanged glances, unsure whether to trust him, but in that moment, they remembered Paul's command, to forgive, to love, even when it costs something. Slowly, Damaris nodded and said, then stay. You've heard the truth too. The hours that followed passed in quiet whispers. They decided to scatter, carrying copies of the letter across the city, making sure Paul's words would live on no matter what happened next. Before leaving, Tychicus placed his hand over the clay jar, sealing the scroll beneath the floor one last time. If they come, he said softly, let them find an empty room, but not an empty faith. When dawn broke over Ephesus, the city looked the same, But something in the hearts of those believers had changed forever. They no longer felt like a small, frightened group hiding in the dark. They felt part of something greater, a story that stretched beyond walls, beyond fear, beyond time itself. Paul's message had done what it was meant to do. It awakened courage. Weeks later, word reached them that Paul's voice had fallen silent in Rome. Some wept, but others smiled through their tears, knowing his letter would keep speaking. It was more than parchment. It was power, hope, and truth that no prison walls could contain. The Roman soldier who once came to arrest them now carried a copy himself, reading it in secret. And so, the letter to the Ephesians lived on, crossing oceans and generations, reaching hearts that Paul could never meet. Even now, its message still whispers the same truth, that we are chosen, loved, and called to stand firm in a world that often forgets. The battle may be unseen, but the victory has already begun. And maybe, that's the real mystery Paul wanted us to discover all along.